Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Nuance Needed podcast. I'm Amanda, and I am so excited to be chatting with Stefanie O'Connell. How are you doing, Stefanie?
I'm okay, a little tired, but aren't we all?
Yes.
You know?
Seriously. For those who don't know, Stefanie has all of your work is about like female ambition and the motherhood penalty. You have an incredible Substack called Too Ambitious, and you have a book coming out. Is it by the same name? Or is it a little different?
I tried to get it
yes.
to be called Too Ambitious because I love that title, but it's called The Ambition Penalty, which is appropriate because that's what the book is about. And we can talk more about what that means. But it'll be out in May 2026, but it is available for pre-order now, which is really important for just saying that there's a demand for this book so that bookstores will stock it. So you can get that now.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I will link all of that into the show notes. How did you get into this, Stefanie? I feel like I followed you. I feel like I've watched you get married and watched that whole
journey. Been a while. Yeah. It's been a journey. And the journey, I would say, toward this book started with my career as a personal finance writer.
Right.
I was writing about money and, like I said, personal finance. Like, how do I budget? How do I pay off debt? I hosted a show for Real Simple magazine for a while called Money Confidential.
Okay.
As a podcast, again, all about personal finance.
Yeah.
But what I really liked about hosting that show was I would also interview people about how money showed up in their lives. And that winds up being a really different kind of conversation because then you're not talking about best practices. You're talking about how best practices intersect with the reality of people's experiences of trying to put that into practice.
Yeah.
And what happened was I would talk to people who were trying to do all the quote unquote right things and it wouldn't work or it would backfire.
Yeah.
And that really started me on a journey of digging deeper. Why is this happening? This is what we have been told to do, especially as women, to get ahead.
Yeah.
Why isn't it working? Why is the gender pay gap growing? Why is it now where it was 20 years ago before we ladies who are more educated and ambitious than ever even began our careers? And that led me down a research rabbit hole that I have yet to climb my way out of because I love it so much. And I think the reason I became so obsessed with data and looking beyond just money, but I read a lot of psychological research, sociological research, economics research, of course. But I think what I found is that it really validates the reality that you are not going crazy. You are doing things right.
Yeah.
So it's not you that's the problem.
Right.
But we're so used to these reasons and these explanations for why things are as hard as they are, why are things as unequal as they are, and why is it still that way? And I really decided, I'm now seeing this. Let me write a book about that.
Yeah.
And so this book, I think, comes certainly from that experience and the data, but it also comes from like this broader story that I think is probably really resonant for those of us who are approaching midlife, have young children. Yes, I know it's hard to believe it, but we're like, coming up on that. And it's really to speak to this experience of, I think, a lot of disillusionment and burnout. And I think that kind of stark contrast between the girl power of our youth and the outcomes of our present.
Yeah, absolutely. What statistic or fact should we start the rabbit hole from? What was one of the first things that just blew your mind and started this all for you?
Okay, I would say in terms of where I really started down the rabbit hole was interviewing women about salary negotiations. And this advice that I had written and covered too as a personal finance writer about all you need to do is be more confident, ask for more, really assert yourself as though women were not already doing those things, right? And what I found was not only have women been just as likely to negotiate their salaries as men from as far back as the 1990s, in fact, even more so, but they are also more likely to be penalized instead of rewarded for doing so. So this is not just about women being less likely to get what they ask for, even though they ask just as often. And their negotiation style also is the same. There is no, they're not doing something wrong. It is about the cultural expectation that women should be grateful and that they should know their place, which is not to ask for more, which is not to get ahead. It is to be supportive and deferential, especially when it comes to men. And so women are penalized often, again, not just not getting what they ask for, but sometimes even getting backlash for doing so, labeled unlikable, labeled bossy. And that has real consequences because then people don't want to work with you in the future. They're less likely to promote you. They're less likely to pay you more for your next possible pay bump.
Right.
And that has a cascading consequence over the course of women's careers. So that first experience of backlash, you have this happen. And then by the time you have that next experience, you're already set up with the penalties of the first experience, plus the trauma of it. And we pretend like women are irrational when we say we feel something like imposter syndrome. We pretend that it's like some kind of natural gendered thing. No. This is a rational response to experiences, not our biology. But to our lived realities. And what I find in the research is that women and men alike adjust their behaviors in response to their experiences. But women have vastly different experiences because of these gender norms that say men should be this strong, decisive, aggressive, competitive, and are rewarded for it, and women should not. And so when women violate that expectation, they have these penalties, and then they are set up for a completely different life course, not just in their careers, but in every aspect of their lives.
Got it. Oh, that's so interesting also with just thinking about all the advice that hasn't worked, right? Of lean in. And that makes so much sense based on what you're saying. If when women are told to lean in, it actually is hurtful for their careers.
And I'm not saying it never works, right? I do still use your best practices, but you have to be prepared for the fact that this is a gendered reality. And we have told women that this is what's standing in the way of you getting ahead. And that is not true, first of all. And it ignores the experience and the judgment that they disproportionately face in the process. And so even when you do succeed, what often happens is like all the stars will align. You'll get what you ask for. You had someone who was actually receptive to you. You had someone who was really supportive. But unless the entire institution is changing, the norms about what men and women are allowed to be, what they're allowed to ask for, what they're allowed to want, unless those broader systems change, even when you do get the raise, even when you do get the promotion, even though when you do get what you ask for, you're still going to be subject to more backlash, microaggressions, biases at every step in the journey. And it's these compounding daily experiences over time. That's what drives gender inequality. It's not your choices. It's not your behaviors. It's not you.
Is there any data on the difference between like women who are negotiating with other women or women at women-founded companies? I think that's so fascinating, especially when we get into some of those like high-profile companies that turned out to like not be great. Like I'm thinking of Outdoor Voices and Glossier and all of that stuff.
Yes. So I actually wrote a whole chapter on this. And what I really want to make clear is that this is not an individual phenomenon. This isn't like man versus woman, me versus you versus whoever.
Right.
These are broader cultural and societal ideals. And the way they are consistently reinforced in every aspect of our lives. And what that ideal says is that men should be one way and women should be another way. And the way men should be, quote unquote, should be, aligns with what we want success to look like professionally, what we want power to look like, what we want to reward financially and economically. And what we want women to be is supportive of everything that men are. Those ideals are the water we swim in. It's the air we breathe in, all of us, no matter our gender identities. And so unless we have actively challenged that in our own life or have models of that, that's the ideology we inherit. So that applies no matter your identity. Right? No matter whether you're a man, a woman, gender nonconforming, whatever. Again, I think it's really important that we get out of like, it's man versus women, you and me. This is not an individual phenomenon. Patriarchy teaches all of us that an ambitious woman is someone who should be put in her place. She's bossy. She's aggressive.
Yeah.
She's a bitch. And so men and women alike penalize ambitious women. However, that being said, when you get women represented in critical mass, what you start to see happening, and when I say critical mass, I'm talking about not one woman founder, not two women in the C-suite, not three women managers. And of course, this applies also with some diversity of identity within the category of women as well. When you start to see women represented in a meaningful capacity at scale, a lot of the gender bias starts to shift. Because then you start getting out of a place where the woman in power first is incentivized to conform to the male standard of what success looks like. Right? Because if your power as a woman is always conditional. It's always conditional when you don't have enough women in power on those men continuing to allow you to have it. Because they have it.
Right.
Statistically, they have it all. So your power is conditional on in many times conforming to their old boys club. But when you start to see women, 60% of workplace managers, gender pay gap disappears.
Wow. I mean, that's like proof, right?
It really is. So when you have women working in solidarity and in cooperation, and they are not incentivized to uphold patriarchy anymore because they have to as a survival strategy to fit in, then it gives more opportunity for women to actually shift the culture and actually change the status quo in a way that not just benefits women, it benefits everyone. It reduces inequities across the organizations and across like all kinds of metrics. This happens in political positions as well. Communities become more likely to invest in health, in care, and so it really, really requires us working at scale to be able to affect the kinds of change that isn't just about like measuring success by one more woman getting ahead, but by women's outcomes collectively improving.
I love that. I love how you're able to take like really specific data and research and like explain the broader pattern of what's going on.
It took me like 5 years to start to even begin to just digest this. Because I can tell you, I got Google Docs on Google Docs of, okay, so how does this connect to this? And what's really incredible, and I'm still doing it, to be honest. It's like that beautiful mind meme where you got the guy like looking at all the pieces and like, this connects to this. Because it does. Like it's all connected. And when you start to understand it, again, out of like any individual situation, situated within the broader context of like absolutely everything. Another really big thing that wound up coming up for me when I was writing this book was like the way the personal and the professional are often talked about as like kind of these siloed spheres, when in fact, like they are inextricably connected. And the inequality in the home is essential to the inequality outside of it. Then it starts to be like, oh, wait, I get it now. Talking about these two things as separate is a way to preserve the system as it is. Because it makes you think, oh, well, that's just a personal issue. But these are not personal problems. These are political. They are power problems. They are shared problems, not individual, not personal.
Absolutely. Well, I think I was reading, not your last article, the one before on Substack, just about how men are so incentivized to have women stay at home because the amount of labor that exists that you would have to pay for. And I relate to this a lot. I mean, I'm very lucky that I am like the breadwinner in my family, but my husband does a lot of the back end stuff that normally a woman would do. And it's, it makes you just see how much needs to be done. And I think what's so hard sometimes is like, I get the idea of when people say no one can work like this without a stay-at-home mom, or it's bad for all of our health, because how do you do this when you have a toddler or multiple kids and both parents work full time? It doesn't work. You kind of need someone who will always be there, especially the more kids you have, like the more sick your kids are, all of those things. But like the problem isn't that women need to do it.
Correct.
It is that society needs to change. We need we need to, be more collective in how we raise kids. We need free daycare. We need more options. We need more flexible work. We need all of these societal structures. And it is like fascinating how you can just be like, oh, it's the problem is just women need to be home, instead of being like, no, this is a collective problem. And if we care about like kids being born and like mental health and all of that, all the people that are so worried about the birth rate, we should actually look at things that matter.
Yeah, 101%. I mean, this is one of my biggest fascinations, and I would say one of my biggest pet peeves in terms of how it's discussed. You'll even see self-identified, I'll say, progressives saying that, people who are arguing exactly the points you made, that this is all unsustainable, which is correct.
Yeah.
And that so women should just be in the home. It just makes sense. Like, it's what, don't we value care work? Like, those are seemingly sounding progressive arguments. But what that is not saying, even though it is that this is not valuing care work.
Yeah.
What it is enforcing a gender division of labor. To value care work would be to meaningfully compensate it.
Yes.
It would be to meaningfully support it.
Right.
It would allow literally anyone to engage in it, because everyone should engage with it. Mm-hmm. If they are a parent, if they have an elderly relative, the human condition is a condition of having to care for people.
Yep.
But the very people who most talk about women should go back into the home are explicitly against those kinds of supports.
Yeah.
Because, again, they don't care about supporting care work. And they don't care about your quote unquote, like respecting your femininity or whatever other garbage they're trying to sell you. No, they care about enforcing a gender division of labor and a gender division of power. Mm-hmm. And they don't want support systems and that labor to be valued and meaningfully made possible for more people.
Yeah. Because
it would allow men to do it too.
Yes.
And that would disrupt the system that enables men to hold a disproportionate share of power, economic authority, and personal power.
Totally. I mean, one of my favorite pieces of research that I saw you state that then I quote to everyone is the whole idea of when you get married, right? Like, men make more money and women make less. And especially then if you have a baby, obviously that's a huge penalty for women, and men make more money a lot of time, like, because they're taken more seriously. And it's fascinating too, because I've talked to my husband about this, and he, has such a, as all men do, such a different perspective around aging. And he's always kind of been like, aging is good. I'm taken more seriously, which is the exact opposite of, how good it is for a man to be married and how not good it is for a woman to be married, because we assume then she's going to have kids and she's going to drop out of the workforce.
Yeah. We talk about these things like they're gender neutral. This happens all the time.
Yeah.
We talk about things like becoming a parent or getting married or aging, all these things you just said, as though we experience them the same way. Yeah. And so if you're having a different experience, that's your fault.
Yeah.
No. That's not what's happening, right? To go to the point of ageism, I remember thinking too when I was younger, oh my gosh, when I get older, people are going to take me more seriously. But now I'm a mom.
Right. No, you
and
hit
so
a
now
peak. It's going down.
Right. But I never, here's the thing. I never got there.
Yeah.
Right. Now I'm a mom, and I didn't even have kids till I was 37. I have a few grays now. Like, I'm aging. My daughter, when by the time she's not a young kid, I'll be like much more, even significantly more age. Yeah. So the research finds that a lot of the way gender discrimination now works is that it's like, we're not going to say we're not going to value you or promote you or whatever because you're a woman. But what it does do is take something like age, and then it says you're too young. Well, then you're going to have children, but now you're too old. So in effect, you do the same thing, but you hide it. You hide it under age. Whereas for men, young can be framed as, that's exactly the kind of fresh thinking we need. Oftentimes you'll get that, especially like in certain sectors. And then as you're older, more seasoned, more experienced. So it's the way the same characteristic, just like it's the way the same behavior is rewarded or penalized differently. And effectively, it enforces the same discrimination, but gaslights you with pretending it's not happening.
Woo! That is so, I didn't realize this was all hidden under ageism. I thought it was like more explicit.
Ageism is just one category.
Okay.
So this is a paper that's in the book. It's in the first chapter of the book that I reference. I haven't made a Instagram reel about it, but who knows? Maybe soon.
Yeah.
And I think it identifies 30 different aspects of a woman's identity that gets used in this way. Age is one example. Race is another example. Parenthood is another example. I can't remember them all, but
I mean, yeah, I'm sure like body shape, I'm sure they're right.
Body shape, right? Like there's a lot of like the beauty standard even. And it works in both ways, right? Because
you're distracting if you're too beautiful. Yep.
You don't want to wear too much makeup, but you also don't want to wear enough makeup, right? And then with body size, absolutely. Like, no, we can't have that. But in men, like, oh, well, you know, he's dignified. So you just see everywhere the double standard.
Yeah.
And it really feeds into how what I call like this myth of meritocracy winds up being maintained even in the face of such obvious inequality. As a woman on the internet, like if you are existing as a woman on the internet who talks about gender inequality in any way, you will hear the exact same things said to you over and over again about why you are quote unquote wrong. It's not that women are paid less. It's just that, you know, they don't ask for more.
Yeah.
Or they're in these jobs or, you know, whatever, or they're mothers.
Right.
You hear it again and again and again. Yeah. And it is this constant gaslighting that we all kind of like just wind up accepting.
Yeah.
Even if like we don't accept it, we'll be like, oh, you know, well, maybe that's right. But I think it's because we haven't connected the dots more broadly.
Yeah.
And we haven't like peeled back like all of the different findings from not just, you know, what's showing up in the Bureau of Labor Statistics data, but also like, oh, well, what's actually happening like from a sociological standpoint or a psychological standpoint that actually exposes that you can do the same thing. You could be the same person. You could have the same experience. They do this with like identical resume formats all the time.
Yeah.
So like you kind of rule out all the other factors and you'll still see this discrimination in 2025 all of the time. It hasn't gone anywhere. It's just better hidden.
Ooh, I love that. That is so fascinating. I really love also just how you talk about ambition. Obviously, that's like your whole thing, but it feels like there was rightly so a backlash to girl boss culture, which needed to happen. It went way too far off the rails. And I think, we have like overcorrected now into this like trad wife culture. And I think it's fascinating to see, like, I am someone who's very ambitious and I like don't even talk about it a lot because it has sort of been this backlash of, I see stuff all the time that's like, the more I heal, the less ambitious I am. We've almost framed it. Like, I know that's a separate, we'll get into trad wives too, but this is all also like a progressive idea also of like, you must be running from something. There must be something wrong with you if you're ambitious. Like, I think you wrote an article called like ambition is a dirty word. Tell me all about that. Or it's not a dirty word. I forget.
What I noticed about that discourse, and again, this is where I saw it cross into the progressive lines and like even the anti-capitalist and leftist lines, was it was almost exclusively a conversation about women's ambition. It wasn't about ambition. It was about
I've never seen a man say the more I heal, the more.
No. And what is really interesting is when you think about like anti-capitalist movements among men, what I think about is like Zoran Mamdani. I think about unions. I think about things that, first of all, are like incredibly effective in terms of challenging these unequal systems. But you know what they're also all about? Being more engaged versus what everything that is happening in this like feminized anti-ambition discourse or anti-hustle culture discourse is about total disengagement. And it's about a withdrawal to the self. It's about an isolation. And that is incredibly problematic because what happens is like, you have this whole like self-care ethos.
Yes.
But first of all, self-care doesn't do anything to materially change the conditions that created your burnout in the first place.
Yes. My God.
What it does do is leave you isolated and leave you less able to have access to resources and even more importantly, community to both help you when something inevitably happens and you need other people or you need economic resources or you need some recourse. And it also leaves you disconnected from like what makes life worth living, which is being in community. There is this glamorization of isolation. And I think it's been an incredibly effective tool.
Yeah.
Because as I said, the most kind of powerful way you push back against these systems and actually challenge them is in community. And I think one of the reasons that tradwife is like almost always pictured alone or like in the nuclear family, like in this incredibly isolating vision of what family quote unquote should look like.
Which is also so like not 1950s, like not right?
No.
Like
there's so much about that. Like,
yeah. But like, yeah, all those people like lived in community with each other.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Like we're kind of mistaking a gender division of labor like for a social safety net. Like what people want is access to support. They want access to people. They want to not feel so overwhelmed. But the way you do that is not to disengage. And in fact, like one of the things I cover a lot in the book is that by creating this very gendered withdrawal, or a narrative, I would say more, of gendered withdrawal, the systems that make these work and family and combining the two so unsustainable get worse. Because what happens is it leaves more men in charge. And as they get more access to women's labor for free at home, they have less need to say, I don't need to be on call 24/7. Who needs to be able to pick their kids up at 3:00? Don't you have someone to do that for you? And so ironically, like the very system that you're alleging to challenge is actually reinforced when you withdraw completely from it. And this isn't me saying like, yes, we all got to go down on hustle culture and work. No. What I'm saying is it requires the load to be more equitably shared. And that doesn't happen if you just like give men more free labor and more free resources to exploit.
Yeah. All right, if you're listening to this and feeling like something is landed, I want you to pay attention to that, because when that happens, it's not a coincidence. And if you've been thinking about therapy, but you've really had not great luck, you want someone who gets it, not just clinically, but personally, I want to share with you about my practice, Therapy for Women Center. All of our therapists have actually been through the things we treat, whether that's trauma, anxiety, eating disorders, parenthood. When you're sitting there and talking about hard things, you know that the person on the other side really gets it. That's really why I started my practice, because I was sick of going to therapists who didn't fully understand the things that they were treating. At this point, we have over 30 therapists, and we actually hand match you to the right one based on what you're going through. And if we don't get the match right, we'll waive your intake fee and help you switch to another therapist in the practice. We really feel like finding the right therapist shouldn't feel like another thing to white knuckle through. When you reach out to us, you can talk to our intake coordinator, you can email us, you can text us. We'd love to hear from you. We serve 42 states online, in person in the Philadelphia area, but right now we have immediate openings in North Carolina, Arizona, Florida, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and many more, South Carolina, Ohio. We'd love to support you if you're looking for a new therapist. Reach out to us at therapyforwomencenter.com, or you can text us at 215-847-6749.
There's actually a series of 5 studies that finds that men who are married to women who are not employed in the paid labor force are more likely to make decisions that prevent the advancement of qualified women in the workplace. And then single guys who then get into marriages where their wives are not employed, they also become more likely to experience a negative change in their attitudes and behaviors toward women in the workplace. Because, again, they adopt to this model of like, well, I don't need flexibility to go pick my kid up. I don't need a workplace that accommodates a summer off from school or a sick day or an elderly relative. So why should you? And so then the standard gets set by people who have no caregiving responsibilities because other people do it for them.
Right.
And what I argue is that labor needs that's why the sharing of unpaid labor and caregiving labor has to become more equitably shared on a broad level. Of course, in life, things happen. There are seasons of give and take. But what we find in the data is that give and take almost 90% plus of the time only goes in one direction.
Yeah.
And we have to not let that happen. And in the meantime, I would say that we have to build policies and ways of working that accommodate for all of these things. They have to accommodate care. In the idea that women are more likely to do this work of like school pickup, for example, and that's why they should be paid less is the justification. That is like such a common way of thinking, but it just shows us how like totally misogynistic our culture is. Instead of saying, oh, no. If this is the reality that people are dealing with and we want children in this society and we want them to be cared for and loved, then how do we make sure those are the people who are succeeding and being supported? That is the way the question needs to be framed. And it's really like blatantly sexist to suggest anything otherwise.
Well, I think it's so fascinating too, because again, like I feel like my marriage is as equitable as it can be given the state, right? And I still have to push back against narratives and things like that because it's the water we swim in, like you said. And I think what is so fascinating too that comes up for me all the time, because I work a ton, but I have a lot of flexibility. So a lot of times, even if my husband is going to do it, like he does pick up and drop off every day, but I am like, well, I need to be there sometimes. I need to like go to this Halloween party in the middle of the day because I don't want to, like, I am so much more likely. I could tell him every day I need to work until 7 and I would sleep way more. But I want to, right? Like that's the other interesting thing is like, I want to be with my child. So I don't work from 5 to 7 p.m. and then I work afterwards. And it is just, it's fascinating also how because of our culture, I think, and we probably label this as just like innate women wanting to be around their kids, right? Is that I feel bad that I'm not there for things and I will twist myself into knots where my husband doesn't do that. Like, and you could argue, oh, well, maybe it's because he's like the primary person doing a lot of things, but I'm the one that is like, I need to be at everything. I need to see every game. I need to do everything. And it's fascinating, right? I grew up with a dad who was wonderful, but worked very full time. And he was never at any of my stuff because he couldn't be. And I don't think he never felt bad about it.
Yeah. First of all, people wanting to spend time with their children is not gendered.
Right.
What is gendered is the expectation of how much time you will spend with them. And so this is where it comes back to like getting out of our own individualism, our own personal, whatever is happening for us, and recasting what we're feeling and experiencing within the broader dynamics of a world, of a culture, of workplaces, of PTA groups, of everything that says, you're the mom, you're supposed to be this. And then to recognize that that pressure you're feeling, it's not just about you wanting to spend time with your kids. It's not. It's that expectation. And that's an expectation that is not put on men. So even if you are in a relatively equitable partnership, the world around you isn't. And so those pressures are still there. And that's one of the reasons why I really argue that, if you want something resembling an equitable heterosexual relationship, like you need a relationship that basically prioritizes women's needs and supports. Because not only is it so incredibly rare when you shoot for equal to get equal.
Yeah.
It's like astonishingly, vanishingly rare.
Yeah.
Per the data. But even if you were, the world around you isn't, right? And it will always pull toward demanding more of her, right? Whether it's the school calling mom first, the doctor, my chart being connected to mom's record automatically when the baby's born, not dad's. Like every single system is defaulting to mom as caretaker. And so in order to counteract the broader structure of the patriarchal world, you have to take that into account to all of these, like what feels like very personal things, but are actually like very, very common and shaped by these much more collective expectations.
I think that is such a good point because I do think that is like kind of why my partnership works, is that it is sort of oriented around like I am not to be weird, but like the most important person in terms of I'm like the breadwinner. And then, I still do things because I want to help. I don't just like, I'm not just fine with not doing anything and participating. So I still do participate.
Well, and the research shows that women who are breadwinners in heterosexual relationships still do, in most couples, the vast majority of household and caretaking labor. So given what we know about this, like I really, really strongly believe that this is how relationships should be built, around supporting women's needs.
Yeah. Well, if you care, I mean, especially in a dynamic where you're going to have children.
Yes.
Like, I don't know what else you do.
This is another really good example of what I was saying before about like how the thing that's used to justify inequality should actually be the thing used to justify why we should be like going out of our way to build things around women. So like breastfeeding is a really good example of this. People are like, oh, well, moms need to breastfeed. So the demands on their time, no wonder they're paid less. And it's like, no wonder they're paid less. Like, then give moms money, give them support. Then their husband, or rather like, then give dads the responsibility of doing literally everything else, because breastfeeding is a full-time job. Like I just, our willingness to accept that what is grossly inequitable and exploitative as fair is just nuts.
Yeah. Is your theory, and this is like really broad, sort of that like, because it sounds like from what you said about the research of like men when they get married become worse, sort of, in that like they are reinforcing this a little bit more because they have that experience that someone else is doing it and becomes invisible. Like it sounds like there's a cliff that sort of happens when women get married and have children in like not just her, but like him.
Yeah, you're right. In the household labor, for example, men's household labor goes down when they get married and women's household labor goes up. So you'll often hear another like, it's like a playbook, these guys in my comments, like they all have the same comments. And it's so funny because like I've done the research now that I know why they're all wrong, but they don't know why they're all wrong.
Yeah.
So you'll constantly hear guys like, well, this is just an issue of preference or an issue of standards or an issue of skills or aptitudes, right? She just wants things clean all the time. Women just want to vacuum, right? It's absurd, okay? Men's household labor going down when they get married, that says like, there's nothing about this that's a preference.
No, that is also clear as day.
Yeah. And women's going up, even though like theoretically they have someone who can share the labor. And you want to know it's even a wilder stat? Their women's household labor goes down when they divorce, even though they're more likely to have custody of children. So it is not even the children, it's the men.
Wow.
And men's household labor goes up after they divorce again. Not because they didn't want a functional home, but they were willing to put that labor onto someone else on average. And so it's just really striking. I was not as pessimistic as I am now when I started this process, but it is incredibly hard to confront this kind of lived reality. And then the gaslighting on top of it that insists that that's not what's really going on without being like, oh, this is really bad.
Yeah.
This is so bad. And then the way we're like conditioned to accept it. And then also at this point in my life, I see this.
Yeah.
I see the cost. I see how tired people are. And then I see, again, them blaming themselves. It's like, well, if I could just like schedule it right or like, or even the labor of trying to convince their partner it's a real problem, right?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
If he would just read this book, or if we just had this system, like I can crack this code. It's not, if he wanted to, he would. And I think we really need to have a little bit more clarity around that. And one of the things I posted recently that got a lot of attention and I think was really clarifying for people was, let me just read it because I want to say it correctly, that researching my book showed me that most women aren't caught between work and family. They're caught between their partner's unwillingness to change and not wanting to end their relationship or marriage. And that's a very different tension than the one we pretend it is. And it's really, really hard for most of us to kind of come to terms with that and say like, what's really happening is that there is a preservation of relationship stability over relationship equity. Mm-hmm. And that might sound like a really admirable goal, but the fact is, like, for most women in heterosexual partnership, it's leaving them totally exhausted, totally like burnt out, really struggling. And then they're like, well, I guess it's just my job that's the problem. And it's like, no. Like, not only are men working more hours and getting paid more while still having children, but they also have more leisure. Yeah. They also have more rest. They have more time for hobbies. So, like, it's the people who are getting the economic resources who are also getting the time resources. Right. But meanwhile, we're like gaslighting women into pretending that, like, they're the problem or their work is the problem. Like, the thing that gives them economic autonomy is the problem. That's not the problem.
Oh my gosh. That's crazy. That's blowing my mind.
Yeah.
A little bit.
It really does. Like, every time I see these papers, I'm like, oh my God, like, what are we? And then I go back to like reading the news and I'm like, what are we even talking about?
Yeah.
You know, like, another really good example of this is, and again, understandably, you always hear people comparing the cost of childcare to a mother's income.
Yes.
45% of mothers in the U.S. are the primary breadwinners for their families.
I did not know that.
Almost never hear a man's income compared to the cost of childcare.
Never. Absolutely.
And it's just like, what are we talking about?
Yeah.
You know, I always want us to bring back this lens of like, what is this very overwhelming gendering, almost always in one direction. And of course, there are always going to be exceptions.
Yeah.
But let us not use exceptions to dismiss the reality of the rule.
Yeah.
Because these are not personal problems. These are political problems. They are actively being manufactured and then maintained by these kinds of justifications and excuses and discourse. So let's like talk about the discourse in a way of like, who does it serve to pretend that this is not a gendered issue? Well, it serves men.
Right.
Because then we're not talking about the cost of childcare.
Yeah.
Then we're just saying it makes sense that women should have no access to money for the caregiving they provide. Anytime someone says it makes sense, it's almost always a red flag for me. Almost always.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about trad wives? I know we kind of got into it, but I love all of your discourse also about trad wives because it again connects to trad wives have sort of co-opted women's slowing down, nourishment, doing things for them. And it's so like marketable. I mean, I remember in the pandemic, I got really far down. It was before trad wives were popular, but it was like homesteading, like TikTok. And I was like convinced that like having animals to take care of would like make me less stressed, which was a very insane take, but
it's a great example because you talk to a farmer?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Ask them, right? Yeah. But it's trad wives are doing the exact same thing, right? And I would actually argue that all these trends are like a little pipeline and they're all really kind of just trying to lead you into like a more and more patriarchal vision of what ideal quote unquote womanhood should look like. And what that ideal is something that takes what is in fact incredibly exhausting, hard work, constant. What trad wives are performing instead of doing is hard labor, taking care of multiple young children, cooking from scratch, homesteading in many cases, making everything like churning butter. You know, like this is hard labor and it never stops. And they're saying this is actually relaxing and you should be grateful to do it for free. So I'm always like, okay, who does it serve? Again, like, who does that idea serve? Because first of all, it's obviously not true. And what the trad wife is capitalizing on is, again, something very real, which is what you're feeling is exhausted, you're burnt out, you're disillusioned. Maybe you're not feeling like very meaningful.
Yep.
And it really is really fun to be able to do work and have like a tangible reward for it. And it really is really meaningful to spend time with your children. Those things are true. But the way the trad wife performs those things are things she gets to do in the way she gets to do it.
Right.
Not just because it's a performance, but also because she's already wealthy usually, or she's making money from her performance of doing it, right? It's really fun to bake things from scratch when all of your other needs are taken care of.
Yeah, when you can pick and choose the most fun parts of staying at home.
Yeah, right? And not even staying at home. Like, there's nothing preventing you with your job from baking bread except your time. And the thing is, if you were actually a trad wife, you wouldn't have time either, because taking care of 5 infants is nonstop. Like, there is no time. So it's literally just propaganda. And it's often a display of wealth as opposed to like some ideal of womanhood. And that ideal of womanhood is really just an ideal that is used to glamorize women's labor while using that as a justification to not pay them for it.
Yes. I would imagine too, right? Like, I think when 2 people work and how much money they spend on, if they're wealthy, the child care, cooking, cleaning, all of that stuff. And it is like so insane and fascinating how I would imagine there's a lot of data to support the wealthier you are, the less you think this is a problem, because you can just easily outsource everything. And you don't even think, how do people do this? Because you just do it because you can pay to have anyone do anything.
Well, and honestly, that's what's happening with the most popular creators too, like Ballerina Farm, the account. Like, she's married to the heir to JetBlue. What you're seeing is like being able to make things from scratch again, because like when your needs are taken care of, you have time for hobbies, not because you're not, not because you're like having 8 children. Like, it's not your children that enabled that. It's your money.
Yes. Yes. Oh my gosh, absolutely. What do you say to the people who, like, this isn't a trick question, I'm just genuinely, you seem to have really great arguments for things. When people defend Ballerina Farm or the trad wives of, right, the whole argument is like choice feminism. What is your response to that?
Choice feminism is so toxic. All right, so let's talk about choice feminism. A really good example, let's say, is Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who made a choice to restrict women's reproductive rights. Does that make it feminist?
No.
No, like not by any stretch of the imagination, right? Being able to make a choice is not feminist. And then if your choice is precluding the choices of other women, it is actively anti-feminist. And that's what trad wives are doing. They are actively working against the very policies that would enable more women to actually embody the role that trad wives are performing. If you wanted more women to be able to stay at home with their children, then you would have meaningful leave policies.
Totally.
But trad wives are a political movement. They're explicitly against this. And so I said this, I think, earlier, but what they are glamorizing is not like valuing femininity or womanhood or even care work. They are valuing a gender division of labor and a gender division of power.
Yeah.
And they don't want universal childcare or paid leave or any other meaningful social safety net that would enable more women to do that, because it would mean men could do it too. And they do not want that. They want only women doing the work for free so that men can continue to have power and resources and the labor of women to support it. And anything else is just a way of obfuscating that reality.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked about a lot of the darkness. Do you have any thoughts of, like, how do we not fall into, if you are in a heterosexual relationship or that is your reality, how do we fight for this, but not maybe hate the people that we're with? Because unfortunately, sexuality is not a choice.
Yeah, it's really hard. I just have so much empathy because I'm seeing people struggle with this every single day. I did in addition to a lot of research in terms of like studies, I did a lot of interviews with people. So I would just see how this showed up for people and I would see how it weighed on them. And it's really tough. And I just want to validate that when we talk about what's happening in heterosexual relationships, it is a big deal.
Yeah. It's
not a big deal. Part of what is happening here is being like, I'm not going to like ruin my relationship over dirty dishes. There's this kind of dismissal. But that's not what's happening here. We're talking about someone who is like preserving their own access to money, power, leisure, rest, sleep at your expense.
Yeah.
And that is a big problem. That is not a little problem. That is a problem of like humanity and respect. And I actually think that women should be angrier. I don't think that we should try to make it feel better. And I think the only way to get our partners to talk about this and take it seriously is to talk about it as the very high stakes issue that it is. And so it's hard because it can mean like a kind of mourning with what you maybe believed. like there is this belief that we all hold on to, that like if I could just articulate it the right way or whatever, I could crack this code, like I can do it. But you cannot do these when you're in a relationship. You can't do it by yourself, right? Someone else has to want it as much as you do, and you can't make them want it. And it's hard to come to terms with the fact that like this person who's purported to like care and love you doesn't want that for you. So I think as an entry point to that conversation, coming back to this idea that this is not a personal problem, but it's an institutional problem. And the institution is not your relationship, but heterosexuality and heterosexual marriage in particular, and how it incentivizes everyone to fall into these patterns and to maintain these patterns. And again, it's not just like about you and your own home. It's about what we talked about before, about the school calling you mom, right? It's about the employer, giving dad more opportunities and giving him promotion when he had a baby, and hurting mom at work.
Yeah.
And it's about your elected representatives and them like voting to like not give you a universal pre-K or whatever. Yeah. But I think what does happen in progressive circles even is a lot of this just gets siloed as a political problem.
Yeah.
And then it lets the interpersonal off the hook. But it's all of those things. So it is political, and it's compounded by what's happening in the institutions and organizations, and it's compounded by what's happening in the home. And what happens in the home in turn then supports what's happening in the political sphere, because then when you have women who are so overburdened at home, they can't ever get into those institutional and political positions to affect the kind of change. So I think it's about having this kind of accountability at every single layer and really, really allowing yourself to treat it as a big deal, because it is.
Yeah.
And also build community with other women.
Yeah.
Please, 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 please. Like, number one thing I could suggest is like finding solidarity, and not with people who are going to like dismiss what you're saying or dismiss your, well, not in my case, blah, blah, blah. No. No, I want you to find people who say, I'm really sorry you're experiencing that. Like, how can I help?
Yeah. Well, I think even to your point about institutions, I think about women who talk to their mothers. Women who talk to their fathers. Women, like that's how all of this stays status quo as well, because you don't just have it, even, yes, community and other women, but some women also are going to want to.
Yeah, well, that is your job, right? Like, why are you complaining? Yeah. I did that.
Right.
Exactly. So no. Finding your community.
Yeah.
And finding that and those communities are growing, because there is now more awareness. And that is like as bad as social media can be, like that is the real blessing of social media, is like it's allowing us to get out of our isolation and say, oh, these experiences aren't personal and they're not unique.
Yeah.
They're shared. And it's not because of like you, and it might not even be like your husband, right? Like, or your boyfriend. Like it's not even him. Like it's everything around us that's saying you have to be this and you have to be this, and never the two shall meet.
Do you also recommend, obviously, people have these conversations earlier before they get married, while they're dating? All of that stuff, I would imagine, is a good thing to do.
Yeah, I think it is. But the other thing is, like, so, as you know from having kids, like, it's like, it drives me crazy when people are like, oh, you should have, like, picked better or like figured this out earlier. And it's like, well, that's not really how it works, And there's some really great examples of this in recent research. There's a sociologist named Alison Daminger who's got great work on this, and she just tracks couples and how they wind up in, and these are progressive couples, self-identified, egalitarian, and then she tracks how they fall into the exact same inequity as like everybody else, even though they're egalitarian. Because what happens is there's always an inflection point, and it's like, one example is two people have different career opportunities in different places. almost always men's careers are the ones that get prioritized. So the move happens, men's incomes go up, women's go down because they've moved away from their career. And then it cascades. Well, now that we've already prioritized his career, it's harder then to go back and shift the balance of power and like make it even out, because like now the investment has already been made. He's already here. We can't leave now. Well, now I'm going to get tenure, right? Like, well, and then when we have a kid, well, like it doesn't make sense that I step back because, you know, I'm the one making more money, right? And so the inequity winds up compounding itself from those early decisions. And so even if you like in good faith think that you're going to have this like tit for tat, like overwhelmingly case after case after case in the research, it just shows up that that's not how it plays out.
Oh, that's fascinating. That makes so much sense.
So I just want to like say I have a lot of empathy, you know, and I don't want people to beat themselves up, because that's the other thing that happens is there's a shame of thinking like the vast majority of women want an equitable partnership and they think they are getting it.
Yeah.
And then they find themselves in a position where they're not in that.
Yeah.
And then there becomes like a feeling of like, well, what did I do?
Yeah.
Like, where did I go wrong? And it can be like a really big source of like shame for identifying like as a feminist, and then knowing that like you're the one who's like given everything up and your labor is the thing that's being like constantly exploited, and like then you're modeling that for your children. You know, there's so much shame. So I just want everyone to like give themselves a break, because one of the problems we really have is that the go-to response for that cognitive dissonance in the research is then reframing that inequality as like empowering. So you see this a lot now in the discourse. There's a lot of like, oh, this is like my powerful move to do this thing I never wanted to do. And like, I get it. Like, we're all constrained, but what we don't need to do, like, I saw people talking about like the hundreds of thousands of women who were pushed out of the workforce in 2025, yes, like targeted because they were Black women in the federal workforce. And then I see women online being like, well, really, this is just like empowering.
Yes, women are choosing to step back and prioritize.
And I'm like, are you insane? Yeah. Like, can you imagine if like men were being laid off in mass, yeah, and then someone's like, oh, they're boy bossing their way through empowering a next chapter and a new vision. That is so gross.
Yes.
Okay. I'm not saying that we all like certainly have shifting priorities, different seasons of life, but what we don't need to do is reframe what are like totally gendered, racist, systemic, inequitable constraints as empowering. Okay. That sucks. Because what does it do? It legitimizes firing a bunch of Black women and putting them at risk of not being able to feed their families while you're cutting freaking SNAP benefits. Like, it makes me crazy. It makes me totally crazy.
Oh my gosh. Well, I think that's a really good point too, of how you kind of brought up that, you know, this whole idea of preferences, of just like how it's so easy to just fall into like, well, I don't really care about this. I don't really care about that. It is nice for this. It is nice for that. And it is just fascinating because, you know, when you get into a fight with your partner, it is hard sometimes to be like, is it me? Is it them? Am I being unreasonable? Are they being unreasonable? And it is so easy to blame yourself and be like, well, I wouldn't have done that, but that doesn't mean that I should. Or I think there's a big phrase that gets thrown around I see in couples is like, well, I would let you do this if you wanted to, right? If you had a hobby where you could golf for 8 hours a day, I would do it. But there's no acknowledgement of like a woman would probably never do that because she wouldn't want to put you in that position.
It's just really like the whole preference argument is so disingenuous. Again, I devoted an entire chapter of my book to it because it's a way of like reframing constraints as choices. And that's not the goal, right? The goal is for us to like have access to the same choices to begin with, right, and then not experience different rewards or penalties when we make the same choices. And that's the conversation I want to see. And this is one of the things I've been trying to articulate, I didn't totally explicitly state this in the book, but it's something that's come up for me as I've been doing more interviews about it, is like, we are all coping our way through dealing in this inequitable world.
Yeah.
I'm talking to you right now. I'm wearing makeup. Okay. I'm doing that. It's certainly something that I feel pressured to by the beauty standard, but I'm doing that because this is the way I'm coping to get through the world. And so I do that. But what I don't need to do is start pretending that my wearing makeup is empowering. So there's a difference between coping and justifying the status quo. And that's really what I want to see, a better change in the rhetoric around all of this, because there's a lot of this going on. And what it ultimately does is uphold the very systems that create such constrained choices to begin with. And so I want to say, if you're taking this step back for this thing, or if you're in this position, or you having to make this choice because under these circumstances, great. That is your right. Coming back to kind of the choice feminism of it all. But please don't start going out and giving speeches about how that's the real definition of empowering, while you're talking about something that literally would, if all women were not paid for any of their labor, that would literally strip away so much of their power. Right. So I think we really need to be careful about that rhetoric. And I'm like, coping versus justifying how we're getting through this is, I think, a useful way of reframing a lot of this.
Yeah, I think that's a really great way to frame it. I really like that a lot.
Yeah, household inequality is probably one of the best examples for people. It's like, the reality is I do have a more flexible job, right? So I am coping with this inequality, but let me not stand here and pretend that makes sense. That doesn't make sense. What makes sense is all of us being able to integrate our family responsibilities and personal responsibilities with a professional workplace and a public life more sustainably.
All right. My last question for you, Stefanie, is in writing this book and this whole experience, what is the one thing you really want people to take away from all of this?
The one thing I want people to take away is anytime you think that you're going to turn inward, or you feel tempted to turn yourself inward, whether it's the mom guilt you're experiencing, whether it's the backlash or the burnout, whatever it is, the bias you're experiencing at work, every time you're like, well, what did I do? Yeah. What do I need to do differently? What is going on here with me? We got to get out of the self-optimization. It's not, and we got to start looking out into the environment. I think we have really reached the limits for women on self-optimization. Okay. And I think it's hurting us. I know it's hurting us because I write about this and I have the research. And what it does is that this kind of thing we all have been conditioned to do. Again, I'm not blaming women for this. This is stuff we have been conditioned into, to always accept responsibility for the problem. But the consequence of that is that we don't then say, well, what about my environment is creating this kind of response to me when I'm doing the exact same thing that this dude next to me is doing? Yeah. That's not a behavior problem. That's not an individual problem. That's an environment problem. And we talked about the different levels of environment, the interpersonal environment, the home, friends. We talked about the institutional environment, workplaces, churches, communities, whatever. And then we talk about, again, the political and the cultural environment. And we don't have to just wait till election day to do these things, right? These are systems that operate on every single level, and they exist in our day-to-day lives, every single level. And so if we can get out of this constant internal me, I'm the problem, and say, wait a minute, how do I see that what is happening is a shared experience happening to so many women? And what is triggering it is not them, but the environment around them. How do I then build solidarity with those women? Yeah. And then work together to push back against that environment?
Well, thank you so much, Stefanie. This was such an incredible conversation. Where can people find, I know your book is coming out, but where can people also just follow you, find your work, all of that?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram at Stefanie O'Connell, Stefanie with an F. And my Substack is called Too Ambitious. And the book is called The Ambition Penalty. And that's the big focus for a while.
Yes.
It's available for pre-order now. It'll be out in May, but pre-orders are really, really important. So wherever you get your books, if you even like your local library, be like, hey, I'd love for you to stock this book when it's available. That would be really great.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.